Our Around the World segment tonight, liberals are having a field day after video appeared to show that the wife of Poland's president snubbed President Trump's attempt at a handshake. Now, the Polish president confirmed that both he and his wife did shake hands with the president, and then he urged his followers to fight fake news altogether. But it does make you wonder, why does the media love to play up any possible instance of a Trump rejection? Take a look at the video. With me now from the Washington Examiner, Philip Wegman. Philip, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Philip, it's so funny because on social media, particularly on Twitter, video footage of this handshake cut off before they showed the Polish First Lady going back to shake Trump's hand. Talk about fake news here.
Well, this whole thing is an embarrassment. You had established reporters from outlets like The Guardian, MSNBC, CNN. They were running with this handshake hysteria that had no basis in fact, and that was purely speculative. One has to wonder if they would have, dominated a news cycle in 2009 when President Obama decided to pull missiles out, anti-defense missiles out of Poland, if we would have had a better relationship with that country. But instead, we have this embarrassment. It just shows how petty our press is.
Right, absolutely. And what did that CNN producer say on those James O'Keefe's tapes? James O'Keefe tapes that they didn't push so hard against President Obama because it would have turned their viewers off if they held him to the same level of accountability as Trump here. But I think the crux of the matter is the mainstream media has a credibility problem. They've damaged their credibility throughout the last, probably decade, but particularly the last 2 years here. They're not doing themselves any favors crying wolf like this.
Exactly. The press has a confidence problem right now. The American people are tuning in, but they're not always believing what they see. And if you're an executive at CNN, you've got to be thinking, perhaps my reporters need to show better judgment on Twitter or when they file stories, because we're just setting ourselves to get knocked down. This was a mistake.
Right. And I guess my next question is, where was the coverage of the actual speech? This was one of President Trump's, I thought, one of his best speeches of all time. He talked about liberty. He talked about fighting for the little guy. He talked about individual rights. I mean, it was an absolutely incredible moment, I think, in American history, and none of these networks showed any of it.
Well, that speech, the address to the people of Poland, was probably the clearest manifestation of Trump's foreign policy that we've gotten during his entire presidency. Not only did he promise to meet the threat of the Islamic State and Russia head on, he also promised never to surrender the West. And you know that it hit its mark because you had folks on the right who aren't always complimentary of the president comparing him not only to Ronald Reagan, but also to JFK during their speeches in Poland. It really was probably one of Trump's best speeches so far.
Right, and I think that probably explains the distraction technique used by the mainstream media, focusing on this non-story, this, I'm going to use your phrase, this handshake hysteria here, instead of the real story. They also ignored Trump's comments to Putin, which brings us to our next handshake. These are the two handshakes, I say, that have been heard around the world. That is President Trump shaking hands with Vladimir Putin. We have a video of this. Take a look.
Thank you very much. Mr. President.
Philip, what could possibly be read into that handshake? Everyone, every single person on TV, every single person on social media, everyone I've talked to thinks they have the definitive, explanation, analysis of the relationship between Trump and Putin based off of that clip.
Well, the sad thing is if they would have watched the speech that he gave in Poland, they would know that not only was he repudiating Obama's European philosophy when it came to, that theater, instead he was actually moving away with some of the isolationism that he espoused during the campaign trail. Trump might have given Putin, a friendly handshake, but during that speech, he owned up to the fact that Russia is the biggest geopolitical threat in that area. And that was something that the Polish people have been very nervous about. So that's the story here, not some handshake.
No, the handshake stories are so lame here. I mean, the two of them met for 2 hours and 16 minutes. They were scheduled to meet, I believe, for a half an hour, is all just 30 minutes. And Trump reportedly confronted the Russian president about hacking our election. He asked if he did it and what he did. I mean, that takes a lot of courage to do that. Yet mainstream networks still talking about the handshake.
We don't know just yet what came out of that meeting. But again, you've got to question the reports when they do happen, because the media has done themselves a disservice by chasing after all of these little fluff stories that don't matter. At some point, you just have to wonder, do they have an axe to grind? And I think the American people have already made their judgment.
Right, and I hardly think we even need to answer that question, do they have an axe to grind? I think it's pretty obvious at this point. I mean, not to sound petty here, but who even cares about handshakes?
Yeah, I mean, like it matters when you're going into your first interview, when you're meeting your girl's dad. But I mean, other than that, handshakes don't determine foreign policy. And I think that what we need to realize, and what the president has started to realize, is that his words are actions. And what he is saying is very significant right now. You better believe that the Polish people heard what he was saying. And you better believe that I think the Russians did also. So let's be done with these silly Twitter clips and actually focus on the news.
Right, and if only the mainstream networks had covered President Obama bowing before foreign leaders half as much as they're covering these handshakes.